This week, I played StarTropics. It's a game that has challenged me since I was a teenager getting into emulation for the first time. Now that I'm a semi-smart adult, has my experience changed? I can tell you with certainty that no, it has not. StarTropics puts you in the sneakers of Mike, a character who gets transported by helicopter to Sea Island to visit his uncle Dr. Jones, a famous archaeologist. Oh, I see where they're going here. Actually, the manual says his name is Steve, not Indiana, but either way, the reference is pretty obvious. Anywho, Dr. Jones has disappeared. The chief of the village, Coral Cola, gives you a yo-yo and says, "Hey, you're 15. You're old enough to take down threatening undead creatures and put your life on the line to save your uncle and possibly the whole world. Yeah, okay, no big deal." Video game logic. StarTropics is an action game for the most part, although there are some minor RPG elements. Mike travels across an overhead world map, talking to characters, learning details on where to go next, and solving minor puzzles. However, the real meat of the game is when you enter the dungeons. These are also overhead, but Mike is much bigger and can jump around, attack enemies, and try to make his way to the boss room. The first thing you'll probably notice when entering the very first dungeon is that the game is tile-based. This feels a bit odd for an action game like this, and although you'll kind of get used to it, it's really never any less awkward. This is mostly because enemies aren't necessarily restrained to the same tile-based movement that you are. For example, Mike can only move and attack in 4 directions: north, south, east, and west. However, some enemies, such as the bats, can move in diagonals as well. This makes fighting them without taking damage a bit more difficult than it should be. And I know what you're saying. I'm too violent. I don't need to kill every enemy in every video game ever. Well, normally I'd agree with you, but like some Zelda games, many of the rooms in the dungeons are locked until you defeat all of the enemies in the rooms. So that pacifist attitude may not clear the level for you. Another way of opening rooms up is by finding switches that are hidden in the blocks. You've probably noticed that there's a lot of leaping up onto these blocks, and they are abundant in the stages. Many times, stepping on a specific one will open up a switch that you can then press, and others may pop up items that Mike can collect to use later. Because of this, you'll want to jump onto every block, and it does tend to kill the momentum of the game, or at least what bit of momentum the game has. I say that because StarTropics does tend to move at a slower pace than many other overhead action games, Zelda included. Mike seems to move around leisurely, and leaping up onto blocks slows him down further. Some enemies will also take a lot of hits, forcing you to almost use a hit and run method of defeating them, and that's even if you can run away. Once again, the tile-based movement rears its ugly head on that front. If Mike moves to a tile and attempts to change direction, he may have to center himself on his current tile before advancing forward. I've taken damage and even been killed because of this. Even entering doors can be frustrating. It's not a great system at all, and for a game released in 1990, I'm confused on why it was developed this way. Zelda was released in '86, and although you were just as restricted, for once the stiffness of the controls kind of helped. Does that make sense? It does to me, so moving on. Alright, if you need another example, look at Crystalis. Yeah, I'll get around to reviewing this one hopefully soon. It too was released in 1990, and look at this. Free movement. Anyway, on to something else. How about we talk about the puzzles? They aren't too taxing. As I said, many of them are just pressing switches that you'll find open up doors or defeat all enemies. But there are other areas that can get kinda cryptic. How about this room that goes completely dark and is surrounded by instant death water? Would you have known to lure these snakes to you to see which one gets the closest, indicating the only gap that you can jump over? Which one of these exits is the real one? The wrong one will kick you out of the dungeon, forcing you to start over. Would you have seen this hidden passageway that is the sole right answer? How about this boss? It's the only one I've seen so far that cannot be killed by conventional methods, and instead just has you hitting 2 switches. All of this might have been alleviated a bit if health items were a bit more prevalent. You start out with 3 hearts, and can find big hearts that increase your max life. But to replenish it in dungeons, you need to find medicine, which can be carried with you to be used when you need it, or small hearts that will give you back 1 or 2 life points. You can also find stars that are dropped from your enemies upon defeat. Collecting 5 of these stars will replenish 1 health unit. And if death comes, you drop all of your secondary weapons and magical items. health potion included. Oh, and when coming back from death, you start out with only 3 hearts filled, no matter what your max is. That kinda blows. Speaking of weapons, seriously, a yo-yo? This is given you by a tribe that states that they have technology to fix your wrecked sub. Yet they can only spare a yo-yo? No wonder why snails take multiple hits, right? It has a range of about 2 tiles and can grab out of reach items, so I guess that's good. You can find other stuff like a baseball bat that is swung around you 360 degrees, and a bola that is thrown further. But these side weapons are limited in use, so if you can manage it, they are best saved for the boss battles. The music of the game isn't terrible, but it does tend to repeat frequently. The dungeons seem to have 2 main themes, the initial song and the coming up on the boss theme, letting you know that you're getting close to the end of the stage. It might get in your head from time to time, but I doubt it's going to be anything that you're going to listen to in your car on long road trips. As for the graphics, they're okay. Nothing I've seen really popped out at me, and the designs of the dungeons are fairly bland. Sure, the enemy designs aren't terrible, but the dungeons themselves tend to have same looking walls, making each room look similar other than layouts. Keep in mind that I was unable to finish the game, as I kept getting a game over in the graveyard dungeon, so things might improve. I spent hours attempting the prior lava dungeon, and by the time I got here, I was just burnt out and frustrated with the game's tile system. I really wanted to like StarTropics. I really did. But the stupid tile-based movement system just ruins it for me. It feels way too restricting to be any real fun. Again, more health drops would have helped tremendously, since it occasionally is hard to dodge enemy attacks other than maybe a well-timed jump. The game is still fairly cheap, going for about $10 to $15 for cart-only copies, so if it looks like something you might be interested in, hey, go for it. I do own the sequel, Zoda's Revenge, but I want to try to finish this one first before seeing if the sequel fares any better. It's probably going to be a while. Final score? 4 out of 7. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.